We've made it to the last Thursday in January. Can you believe it? It's January 30th, 2020, and I am your host, Diane Gatsis Havinga, and we have two very special people who are going to join us in our discussion. But first, let's just take a pause.
On a street corner where the kids boogie all night, or where the wind sing and the stars shine like holiday lights, come a band of angels, salvation in their mind. That's where Mother Spiritual lives.
So welcome back, and I need to talk to you about who's joining me here on Village in Motion today on our spiritual journey. Of course, you know our co-producer and co-host, the Reverend Jim Bell, who's the associate, I'm going to get this right, I have it written down, the Village Church Pastoral. The Village
Church Pastor.
Oh, fine, he's the Village Church Pastor. And joining him was, can I use that word?
No, still am.
You still am. His associate pastor, Miriam Gentle. And Miriam, a lot of people on Village in Motion know Miriam not only because she has come here and helped us out with various Village in Motion, not only about spiritual journeys, but about worship. And she's shared her musical gifts with us, with her wonderful harp. And to be honest, I think that's what I'm going to miss the most. Oh. So having teased that, I guess you need to say something, Jim.
Well, unfortunately, Miriam was also leaving the Village Church after 4 years being on our staff as the pastor for congregational care. She's accepted well, I'll let you explain all that, but she's accepted another church. Her last Sunday will be this Sunday at the Village Church, so I hope that many of you will come out. She will be preaching at both our 8:30 and 10 o'clock services. And then next Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, we're giving a reception to wish her farewell and best wishes. It'll be at Hunters Crossing Conference Center, and I would encourage you to stop by and have a piece of cake and greet her and say goodbye. So we are going to miss you a lot.
Thank you.
And Miriam also came before she was hired. She was your intern.
Miriam was an interim from Wesley Seminary, and that's how we first. She was the second intern. No, you were the first intern that we've had here, and because of her, another intern then did come, and then Miriam joined our staff, and been on the staff for 4 years.
So a total of 6 years if you count the intern.
So we could just say why. But I mean, I'd like to put it in the perspective of, since the show is really about hopefully spiritual journeys. So I'm assuming, and this may be a wild assumption on my part, that something led you to this decision, and it's not a small decision. It's not like, oh, I'm just taking another church across town. I mean, you're moving to Washington.
We're moving to Washington State. So yes, I think in our spiritual journey we have to be open, to put it in spiritual terms, open to the Spirit, right? And in this case, it seemed, my husband's also a pastor, and in his role as a pastor, he was sensing that his time was also coming, his ministry at the church was also coming to a logical end. He had done what he needed to do, and it was time to move on. So that prompted me to also look at and see, where am I, what am I doing, where else can I grow as a pastor? And then, long story short, in my denomination, you put out your papers. It's called Search and Call, and that means that you fill out this profile, and churches are filling out their profiles, and then you kind of put it out there, and somehow you get, it's kind of like a match.
Yeah, that's what came to my mind.
It's a dating match thing.
Computer match.
Well, not quite that. Yeah, it's not quite that way. But eventually, you find the place, and I was very open to just going anywhere. Now, I have to say, I have a daughter in Seattle, so Washington State has been a place we've visited a few times. we're not moving to Seattle, we're moving to the Tri-Cities area, which is kind of in the middle south, closer to Oregon, and on the other side of the mountains. So if anybody's been to Washington State, and especially Seattle, they say, oh, it rains a lot, how can you go there? Well, we're on the other side of the mountains. It doesn't rain, it's desert. So it'll be a beautiful area. The Columbia River, the Yakima River, and the Snake River all kind of come together there, and it's also wine country. So this is a place where Washington State is now developing this, kind of California has with Napa Valley. So they have this area where now it's all about wine and so forth, but that's not why I'm going there.
Sure.
Well, I will come visit.
That's why you may come visit me, but that's not why I'm going. But anyways, to answer your question, I think the spiritual journey is that my time here at the Village Church has been profoundly, just this wonderful experience, a learning experience for me, a growing experience. But now I think I need to move on to see what else I can do, right?
I am just curious about what about Green Spring attracted you to come here? Because, you know, I tried to get students for the whole 10 years I've been here.
Right.
And we never could get them. Yeah. And I was just wondering, what is it about Green Spring that attracted you? Is it?
Well, when I was in seminary, we were required to do an internship. And I knew that I wanted to find different ways to do ministry other than just your regular congregation and regular church, right? I wanted to see what else is out there. And so that attracted me to this because it was a church and you have the Sunday morning worship, you have Bible study, etc. But then you have the wider community, right? It's a very unique place to do ministry. Right. And that was attractive because I thought, well, what does it mean to do ministry in a corporate setting? And so that kind of started there.
Well, how do you think your ministry to the church you're going to might be changed because of what went on here? Right? And I'm asking that from my own experience about wishing I'd had that experience with older people earlier in my ministry. I think I could have been a better minister to older people had I had this.
I think that's a great point. So being a part of this community opens your eyes to a wider community. The population that has that lives here is an older population, and a lot of times in a congregation, when people move to a community like this, they lose connection with the pastor or whatever. By being here, I realize that there's just so much ministry still to anybody, the elderly, whether they're shut in or still very able. They're coming with a life experience that is just so vast and so broad that it needs to be tapped into. A lot of times people don't see that because they'll look at someone who's older and they'll say, well, their time has passed, you know, let the young ones do their thing. And I'm like, no, now that I've been here, I realize, oh my gosh, how many stories, what history, what wonderful opportunities to just really get to know people and have them mentor, you know, younger people. So I think I'll take that with me at the next setting.
So is your congregation that you're going to, is it, I'm assuming it's a mixed generation congregation, or is it?
It is. It's a smaller church, so it doesn't have a huge youth group or a lot of young kids. So it's a good mix of a little bit of everything in there. So I'll have opportunities to do things that I don't really get to do here, like maybe baptisms or youth groups and so forth, you know, so there's that. Yeah, you know.
There was a study that came out just recently, I don't know if you saw it, where they said that people who are older are actually happier than people who are younger. And I thought that was quite curious. Yeah. And they basically based it on the fact that once you get in your 60s, I don't know if they used the number 65, but I don't remember. But it's kind of like, you know, you kind of settle down, you're a little bit slower, and I mean that in the positive sense, not physically, but you kind of go, you know, I don't need to rush anymore. And you've kind of, it's not like when you're, and they prefaced it by saying to someone, an older person, whatever that means, said, well, I don't have time, in reference to developing a friendship, because, as you age, your friends start to die, and you find yourself more alone. And they said, well, you could make new friends. And no, I don't have time for that. And I went, yeah, I get that. And I have said that when I've had issues with people, and I'm like, I don't have time for this. And it's not the time concept, it's just the energy and the commitment and that whole area of the fact that, it's not worth it. I want to spend my time somewhere.
Yeah, I think, you've heard older, wiser kind of thing, that not everybody fits that. But I think there is a little truth to that, in that you hopefully get to know yourself better, know what you can and can't do, what you want to do, what you don't want to do. And some things just, can get put in the back burner because it's not important. And so you have to, I think as you get older, you do realize that you can't do everything, but then you don't want to do everything. There are certain things that are just more important. And I've experienced that myself. And the whole slowing down thing, I think one of the reasons we're moving is we live in DC, very urban, very, very cement, and, just very go, go, go. So we're going to go to a place where it's a little slower paced. It's a smaller city. You can get from one end to the next in 15 minutes. And so I think we're looking forward to that.
In terms of the slowing down, I agree in terms of physically and stuff like that. I also think that people do not want to then be dismissed because of their age.
Yes.
Because even though, for example, I may not get out and march like I used to in some demonstration, I just still have the passion for like social justice issues that I want my children and grandchildren to keep that alive. So I do think this community does not lose its passion for the future just because of our age.
Right. So I think when we're talking about slowing down, it doesn't mean that you stop learning or stop growing or stop having the passions that you did before. I think that's still the case. It's just more of a focusing. You don't have to do everything. You can just focus on what is important. So part of that is, if you were passionate about doing social justice marches in back in the 60s or 70s, you could still do something. It might not be the actual physical marching or whatever, but you could mentor somebody, you could write letters, you could make your voice heard in different ways.
What kind of, in your were there aha moments that you had that were particularly learning experiences, or
While I
any
was
aha
here?
moments?
I think an important one for me was that people generally don't want to stop learning. Learning is important, and I really appreciated that because I enjoyed doing the Bible studies and teaching Bible studies, and I met so many wonderful people that way, and I realized there is just a thirst for knowledge still, regardless of what age. You still want to develop your faith. And as far as in our faith tradition, Bible study is so important because the scriptures are going to inform a lot of what you believe and the way you act morally and ethically. So it's important to keep doing that. And that was a way, I think, an aha moment that learning is still important.
I have another thought, and I'm not sure if it will take us in another direction, so you can reel me in. But my other thought, because I've been having conversations with my father, who a lot of you know is 94, almost 95, and he's starting to, like, well, why am I still here? Questioning it, and we were like, well, you're here for, you're the patriarch of the entire family, and, we all need you, but we think we've given him the permission to, do whatever he needs to do and go on to his next journey. But it just brings me to this whole, he seems to need a purpose now versus just, the family or the great-grandkids, so how can we do that? Have you noticed that around here?
Yes,
With
yeah.
And how do you, like,
Well, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. Most people want to have a purpose where they're actually physically doing something, or, you know, showing that you've produced something. A lot of times my answer for that was, and it's probably not a satisfactory answer for everybody, is that you're still here to just praise God. You know, that seems so, at one level it's very shallow, but at another level it could be pretty deep, you know. You're just here to praise God. And in a way, the way you deal with being elderly, the way you deal with issues of being older and maybe even end of life, is a witness and a testimony and a teaching to others around you. So maybe it's a teaching. You're able to teach. You're able to be. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's all I have.
Well, and I do think that as older people, to pass on to the coming generations certain morals, certain values, certain ethical things, to keep alive a sense of who we are historically, why we have the bad history we have, why we don't want to go back to that, all that sort of stuff. Those people who are in the age bracket of the people that live here know that history well.
Very well, yeah.
And I think can play an important role in helping younger generation. I've always admired Native American religion because of their emphasis on the role of the elders.
Right.
Even, for example, when in their worship services, you don't start until the elders say it's time. You know, so
Yeah. There's a respect for that.
there's a respect for that. Yeah.
Right. And our society doesn't really respect that very well. But I think that's a great point. I think elders as teachers, and yeah.
I just want to ask you, when you first came here, I remember one of the things you said to me, you don't want to be just known as the harpist.
Well.
Did we accomplish that so that you
Yeah,
felt?
you did, and I appreciate that. It's just that in my past life, that's what I was, right? I was a harpist and a musician, and now I was kind of pivoting to something else. So I wanted to explore what that meant,
Right.
and if I continued to just be the harpist, then I would always do that and not explore other things. So I think there was a good mix. I played the harp and piano on occasion, but I was able to do other things, yeah.
so we won't talk about the fact that she came on Village in Motion many a time to
And
play
played
her
the
harp.
And I'm happy to do that. Don't get me wrong. I was happy to do that. It's just that I didn't. That wasn't all. Like I wanted to show that I could do more than that.
But that is a very important part of, I think, your ministry in
Yeah.
terms of how you communicate
Yes.
to parishioners, and I shouldn't say parishioners, but people in general, because there's just something about the harp that, you know, versus
Yes.
other instruments. And even when I hear it in an orchestra, because they're not usually, you know, front and center, right?
They're very
Are there
quiet.
any pieces just for the harp?
There are. You
I mean,
just
there's
don't hear them often.
right. But you know, when you hear that harp, and your attention is immediately drawn to the sound.
It's a beautiful instrument.
And so it's you know, not, and it's of course not the easiest instrument to play.
Right.
So are you going to continue?
I will continue, and that will be to be determined. You know, how much I do that and what my role is. My principal role will be as the pastor. You know, with those kind of obligations. The preaching and the pastoral care and so forth, but obviously I'm not going to stop being a harpist.
So I have a question about Steve.
Steve is my husband.
Right.
Okay.
Years ago, when like when I would go to be interviewed, they'd want to know such things like, does your wife play the piano? Will she teach Sunday school? Did they ask you all this stuff about Steve? What's he going to do?
No, they didn't actually, because he doesn't play the piano. Yeah, that's very old school.
But how's he seeing his role now?
His role,
it's
yeah.
Totally reversed here.
Right. He thinks he's going to learn how to cook and keep the house for a while before he finds a job. So we'll see.
So you're going to eat a lot of macaroni and
Macaroni
cheese.
and cheese in a box.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you as you prepared to, say, accept the position, can you talk a little bit about that journey in terms of what kind of led you to that? I mean, you talked about the fact that you've already, you were thinking it's time to move on. So once this particular church reached out to you, how did you get to the point where you said, yep, that's where I'm going?
I had several, because it is so far away, I had several interviews via Zoom before I actually physically flew and went to see and had a face-to-face interview. And in those interviews, you kind of see that, well, you originally have these written profiles and you read what they've written and you like, okay, they like this, and the ditto, they do the same thing for me. So then when you first do that interview, you kind of mentally, well, are these people that you think you could work with? And all those boxes, yes. So for me, it was more of a sense of they're on the same page with me theologically, they're on the same page of where they might want to go as far as a church, what they might want to do in the community, so there were a lot of similarities, and that was important for me. I don't want to go to a place, and it's just not healthy to go to a place where you're just not theologically in the same place, like you might be very progressive and they're very conservative, or the other way around. That's just not going to be a good match. But we were, I think we were pretty good, well matched. And then when we flew out there and we saw and met with them, it was.
That's a real discernment process.
It is, and it's not a fast process.
Right.
So I've been in conversations for a while now, and it's not something that happens right away, because they too have to talk about me and vote on me, and I sent them sermons and they listened, so it works both ways.
Well, and of course now the village church is getting ready to go through that same discernment process with somebody.
Yeah, you find someone else.
What kind of advice would you give either our search committee or the persons who might be considering it in terms of the role? Because one of the things under discussion in the village church now is changing the title to either associate pastor or co-pastor, so that we really do see that person as more than like pastor of visitation or whatever.
Right. Well, for one thing, I don't know that many people knew this, but I was here part-time. I'm not a full-time employee. I was just 24 hours. So that limits my time constraints. You could only do so much. So I would recommend, if you can, have a full-time person. And then I would recommend to that person to really get to know people before deciding what Bible studies to do, but definitely have a presence on Sunday mornings in the chapel.
Yeah.
I think people will see them, and especially since you then televise the services, people get to know you that way. And I think it's important to just be visible in the community. Go out. A lot of times I would just go around and walk. If you ever saw me go out, get a cup of coffee, you find people and you chat with them, and then, that's part of ministry too. I'm not sitting there teaching or anything, but it's still part of the pastoral care that you offer. So
I do think that the television station plays an important role.
Very, yes.
The chapel television station plays an important role for the visibility of the whole faith community.
Yes.
I think all of us are better known on campus because of that.
Yes. And a lot of times people they enjoyed the service so much and got so much out of it, they want to then watch it again and maybe listen to the sermon again. So it's good.
Yeah, I've been really happy with how we've progressed that channel. When I first started here, it was just, okay, we turn on the camera when there's a service, and that was the end of it. And it really wasn't until the chapel went through the renovation that we said, well, we needed to do something, and brought the channel, the services to what I like to call the flagship channel, 1960 now. And then when the renovations were done, we said, wait a minute, let's keep that. Let's keep the rebroadcast of the services, and let's see what else we can do with the chapel. And we've talked about expanding that programming, but it gets a lot more complicated than it sounds.
Right.
I know over the years, we now send out over 100 bulletins to people that watch it, and And like one couple said, we even cut up some bread and get some
Yeah.
grape juice and set it there and have communion when you,
Yeah.
because they can do everything with
Right.
us.
If they're not able to come
Right.
physically on Sunday morning, they have the bulletin ahead of time and can watch it and follow.
And then we've got some people that still go to their own churches, but still want a bulletin because they will sit down and watch it on Tuesdays when the rebroadcast is. I'd like to know how many, because it's a lot.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, you could ask your viewers to
Yeah.
call in.
We could. So we're running out of time. I'm going to
Okay.
give you the last word if you want to talk to the residents in general and make.
Well, it's been wonderful. I've enjoyed being part of this community as a spiritual leader. I especially just want to thank Jim for being so wonderful and accepting me as an intern so long ago and letting me stay on staff. It's Pastoral Ministries. It's just wonderful. The entire staff is wonderful, and just being part of it has been a blessing.
Well, we've been equally blessed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I can definitely say she will be missed. And I just want to say before we take a pause is so the Village Church services, the live services where you can go in person at the chapel are Sundays, 8 a.m. and
8:30.
8:30 and 10.
Sorry, 8:30 and 10, excuse me, and then they are broadcast live during that time. And then on Tuesdays, every Tuesdays, the second service, which is the 10 a.m. service, is the one that is rebroadcast. And then anything else that comes along, we use usually on like the Thursday, Friday, and even the weekend chapel specials. So with that being said, we're going to take a short pause.
On a street corner where the kids boogie on